Today we're uncovering 5 American bread brands that people actually hate. Reviewers call them too sweet, too dense, too artificial, too disappointing. The same problems popping up again and again across hundreds of reviews from customers who expected real bread and got something else entirely. Number 1 will totally shock you. Wonder Bread. Let's start with the most iconic disappointment in American bread. Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread is nostalgia wrapped in polka dots. For decades, it's been the face of American sandwich culture, school lunches, after-school snacks, childhood memories. That red, yellow, and blue packaging is burned into our collective consciousness. Many of us grew up on it. We trusted it. But when reviewers revisit Wonder Bread with adult palates, the experience sours fast. According to numerous taste tests and consumer reviews, Wonder Bread gets criticized for an artificial sweetness that doesn't belong in plain white bread. Many consumers report detecting an odd, almost chemical aftertaste that lingers uncomfortably. The texture is frequently described as sticky or gummy. Press down on a slice, and it compresses unnaturally, almost refusing to spring back. In one widely cited ranking of supermarket white breads, Wonder Bread landed near the very bottom. Reviewers noted that while nostalgia might carry the brand's reputation, the actual eating experience fails to satisfy modern expectations. The ingredient list stretches far beyond the basics, looking at flour, water, salt, and yeast. You're looking at a significantly longer list designed to create that unnaturally soft texture and extended shelf life. The result, according to many consumers, is bread that feels more like a bread-flavored product than actual bread. Some reviewers describe Wonder Bread as tasting vaguely like cake, sweet where it should be neutral, soft where it should have some structure. When you're building a sandwich, you want a foundation. What you get instead, according to these reviews, is something that compresses into nothing, leaving you with a mouthful of filling and barely any bread texture to speak of. It's not that everyone dislikes Wonder Bread. Some people genuinely enjoy it. But when taste tests put it up against other options, it consistently ranks lower among those seeking bread that actually tastes like bread. UDI's Gluten-Free Soft White. Now let's talk about Udi's Gluten-Free Soft White, a bread that promises softness but delivers something reviewers consistently call disappointing. Udi's is one of the most widely available gluten-free bread brands in America. For people who need gluten-free options, seeing it on grocery store shelves feels reassuring. The packaging says soft white. The branding suggests normalcy. You expect something reasonably close to regular bread. According to consumer reviews, that's not what you get. Reviewers frequently describe Udi's gluten-free soft white as overly dense, with a texture that feels compressed and heavy. One particularly memorable review compared biting into it to chewing on couch foam, a harsh but revealing description of how far the texture strays from actual bread. The slices reportedly crumble easily, making sandwich assembly frustrating. The crust is often described as surprisingly hard, creating an unpleasant contrast with the dense interior. Touch the crust, and it feels almost brittle. Bite into it, and it doesn't give the way normal bread crust does. And then there's the value problem. The loaf is noticeably smaller than standard bread, meaning fewer slices and less product overall, yet you're often paying a premium price because of the gluten-free designation. Many reviewers note that Udi's simply doesn't mimic traditional wheat bread texture particularly well. It doesn't compress and spring back. It doesn't toast with the same satisfying crispness. It doesn't absorb spreads or condiments smoothly. Instead, according to these reviews, it crumbles, resists, and ultimately disappoints. Some consumers report that even when they have to eat gluten-free, Udi's soft white feels like settling rather than choosing. It fills the functional role of bread without delivering any of the sensory pleasure that makes bread worth eating. Sara Lee. Classic White. Sara Lee. Classic White sits in an uncomfortable middle ground. Not aggressively terrible, just persistently mediocre. And sometimes mediocre is worse than obviously bad, because at least with terrible bread, you know not to buy it again. With merely disappointing bread, you keep giving it chances, wondering if maybe the last loaf was just off, only to be let down repeatedly. Consumer reviews of Sara Lee Classic White use words like bland, forgettable, and unremarkable. According to these reviewers, the flavor profile is neutral to the point of nothingness. No complexity, no subtle sweetness, no real wheat character, just a vaguely bread-shaped vehicle for whatever you put on it. The crust reportedly tends toward dryness, not the pleasant crusty outside, soft inside contrast you want, but an unpleasant papery texture that doesn't match the artificially soft interior. Some reviewers note the slices are smaller than expected, creating both a practical problem for sandwich making and a value perception issue. In taste test rankings, Sara Lee Classic White rarely hits rock bottom, but it never climbs toward the top either. It exists in that mediocre zone where the bread is technically edible, but fails to inspire any enthusiasm whatsoever. What makes Sara Lee's mediocrity particularly frustrating for some consumers is that the brand carries associations with quality baked goods. Their desserts have loyal followings, but that reputation doesn't translate to their white bread, which many reviewers feel is outperformed even by basic store brands. When you're paying for a name brand product, you expect something noticeably better than the cheapest option on the shelf. When the taste and texture don't justify the price difference, disappointment follows. Pepperidge Farm, Farmhouse. Hearty White Pepperidge Farm positions itself as premium bread. The Farmhouse line uses marketing language that evokes tradition, quality, and substance. So when you pick up Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Hearty White, you're buying into specific expectations. The word hearty suggests fiber, nutrition, satisfying texture. The word farmhouse suggests authenticity and simpler ingredients. You're paying more for these implied promises. According to reviewer feedback, the reality doesn't match the marketing. Many consumers describe Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Hearty White as bland and unexpectedly dense, but not in the positive, substantial way that hearty should imply. The texture is reported as somewhat heavy without offering the nutritional payoff that might justify that heaviness. When reviewers check the fiber content, they often discover it's lower than what they assumed a hearty bread would provide. The density doesn't come from whole grains or added fiber. It comes from formulation and processing. You get bread that feels substantial in your hand, but doesn't deliver actual substance. The flavor, according to multiple reviews, fails to distinguish itself from cheaper white bread options. If you're paying a premium for Pepperidge Farm, you expect something noticeably better. When you can't taste the difference between this and a budget brand, the value proposition collapses. This is where marketing language creates problematic expectations. Hearty, farmhouse, artisan. These words carry powerful associations. They suggest better ingredients, traditional methods, more nutrition. But they're not regulated nutritional claims. They're marketing descriptors that can be applied regardless of what's actually in the product. Some reviewers note that the bread is just fine, perfectly acceptable. But perfectly acceptable isn't what you expect when you're paying premium prices for words like hearty and farmhouse. You expect better. And according to these reviews, you don't get it. Signature Select Country White. Finally, let's discuss Signature Select Country White, a store brand that struggles to deliver value even at budget prices. Store brands typically set different expectations. Consumers aren't looking for artisanal quality. They're looking for acceptable bread at a reasonable price. The bar is lower. But according to consumer feedback, even with adjusted expectations, Signature Select Country White disappoints. Reviewers describe the bread as soft, which checks the basic white bread texture box, but note that the flavor is virtually non-existent. It's bread in the most technical sense. It holds sandwich ingredients. It toasts without immediately burning. It doesn't spoil within days. But it provides no eating pleasure beyond basic functionality. The ingredient list shows the standard refined flour base with minimal fiber, plus the usual conditioning agents and preservatives for extended shelf life. This isn't unusual for budget bread, but it means the product offers little to distinguish itself from any other mass-market option. The country designation suggests simpler, more traditional bread, but nothing about the actual product supports that association. It's pure marketing language applied to a thoroughly industrial product. What frustrates some consumers about Signature Select Country? White isn't that it's terrible. It's that even at lower prices, it doesn't feel like adequate value. When name brand bread goes on sale for similar prices, or when even marginal upgrades to slightly better store brands don't cost much more, why choose something that delivers only the bare minimum? Step back and look at these 5 brands together, and you see something interesting. These aren't random product failures. They're symptoms of how industrial-scale bread production evolved in America. When you're baking millions of loaves annually, distributing across thousands of miles, and keeping products shelf-stable for weeks, certain compromises become necessary. Refined flour becomes essential because whole grain flour contains oils that can shorten shelf life. Added sugars become important for browning and consistent flavor. Conditioning agents maintain texture across varying temperatures and humidity during transport and storage. None of these individual choices is inherently problematic from a safety standpoint, but cumulatively, they create bread optimized for logistics rather than eating. The bread is engineered for shelf stability and production efficiency, not for taste and texture that satisfies consumers. And consumers can detect that optimization, whether consciously or not. They might not identify specific ingredients or processing methods, but they can taste when something feels engineered rather than baked, processed rather than crafted. The reviews we've discussed today aren't isolated complaints. They're patterns. Consistent feedback across hundreds of consumers who expected one thing and got something else. Too sweet when they wanted neutral, too dense when they wanted light, too soft when they wanted structure, too bland when they wanted flavor. So what do you do with this information? Start reading ingredient lists, not just glancing, actually reading. Compare ingredient counts between brands. Look for whole grain flour listed early, indicating it's a primary component. Notice which breads have shorter lists with recognizable items. Consider the bakery section rather than the packaged bread aisle. Many stores now offer fresh-baked loaves with simpler formulations. Yes, they'll go stale faster. That's actually a positive sign. It means they're not loaded with shelf-life extenders. Check out local bakeries if you have access. Bread baked in small batches with traditional methods tastes fundamentally different from mass-produced options. Once you experience that difference, it changes your expectations permanently. Look for brands that specifically highlight whole grain content or traditional fermentation, backed by ingredient lists that actually reflect those claims. And remember this, your taste buds are valid. Your expectations are reasonable. Your disappointment is justified. When bread doesn't taste right, when texture feels wrong, when flavor disappoints, you're not being picky. You're responding to real differences in how these products are made and what they prioritize. The 5 brands we discussed today rank lower not because they're dangerous, but because they fail to deliver the experience many Americans want from bread. They prioritize characteristics that benefit manufacturers: shelf life, consistency, low production costs, over characteristics that benefit you: flavor, texture, satisfaction. But here's the empowering part. Every time you choose bread, you're casting a vote. You're telling manufacturers what matters. When you choose bread with simpler ingredients, you indicate that quality matters more than convenience. When you buy from local bakeries, you support small-scale production. The bread aisle doesn't have to be a source of disappointment. You deserve bread that actually tastes like bread. Bread that doesn't leave you wondering why it's so sweet. Bread that doesn't crumble in your hands. Bread that doesn't compress into nothing. You deserve bread where the marketing matches the reality, where hearty actually means substantial, where soft doesn't mean gummy, where classic doesn't mean bland. Because not every loaf is created equal, and the more you know, the better your choices become.